Okay, let's talk about tariffs. You hear about them all the time, right? They get thrown around as this big weapon in trade wars, they're a political hot potato, and honestly, they're super confusing. So let's just cut through all that noise and get right to the one question that really matters. And here it is. This is the big one. When a tariff gets slapped on something, who really pays for it? I mean, you hear one thing from politicians, oh, the other country is paying. Then you see the big corporations, the importers, they're the ones dealing with the goods. But what if, at the end of the day, the person who really pays is you?
You know, you can always count on Warren Buffett to just say it how it is. He says, tariffs are a tax, the tooth fairy doesn't pay them. And that's it, right there. It's a tax. It's not magic money that appears out of thin air. Somebody has to pay. And that simple, blunt reality, that's our starting point for unpacking this whole thing.
All right, so to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at the two very different and totally opposite stories you're probably hearing.
So on one side, you've got the political argument. A great example is this claim from President Trump. The idea here is that billions and billions of dollars are going to start flowing into the U.S. from, and I'm quoting here, countries that have taken advantage of the United States. It paints this picture of, evening the score.
But then, you look at how it actually works, the nuts and bolts of it, and the economic analysis tells a totally different story. See, it's not some foreign government that wires money to the U.S. Treasury. Nope, the check is literally written by a U.S. company, the importer who's bringing the stuff in. They write the check to U.S. Customs. Now, that's where the money starts, but believe me, it is definitely not where it ends.
Okay, so if the American importer writes that first check, where does that cost go next? Who ends up actually feeling that financial hit? Let's follow the money trail and find out.
But first, just so we're all on the same page, let's be super clear. A tariff is a tax. That's all it is. So if the U.S. puts a, say, 25% tariff on a product, the company bringing it into the country has to pay a 25% tax on its value to the government. The real question, the million-dollar question, is what does that company do next with this huge new expense?
And this is where things get really, really interesting. Check this out. Right after these new tariffs went into effect, in those first few months, look who took the hit. The U.S. importers. They absorbed a whopping 64% of the cost. It's like they were holding their breath, gambling that maybe this was all just temporary political theater. And the foreign exporters, they barely flinched, picking up only about 14% of the tab.
Well, that gamble, it didn't work out. Fast forward just a few months later, and bam, the whole thing flips on its head. The second it became obvious these tariffs weren't going away, those importers started passing that cost along. And guess who they passed it to? Us. Suddenly, U.S. consumers are carrying 55% of the cost through higher prices, and the importer's share, it got cut in half, just like that.
And this projection for the future, it shows exactly where this is all going. I mean, over the long haul, the math is just undeniable. We, the U.S. consumers, are on track to carry 2/3 of the entire cost. The importers pass it on, the foreign sellers might eat a little bit of the cost, but the lion's share of that tax, it lands right on the price tag you see in the store.
But this whole thing is bigger than just the stuff you buy at the store. When you start putting tariffs on basic fundamental materials, I'm talking about things like steel and aluminum. It creates a massive ripple effect, a shockwave, that goes through our entire economy.
Let's just take steel, for example. So, the whole idea was to protect American steel companies, right? But think about what happens. You tax the foreign steel so it gets more expensive. That means everyone rushes to buy American steel. Demand goes through the roof, and so does the price. American steel prices shot up by a staggering 160% in just 4 years. That's way, way more than anywhere else in the world. And guess what? Same exact story for aluminum, a 45% price jump. Now stop and think about what that actually means for a second. It means that any American company that makes anything out of metal, cars, beer cans, appliances, you name it, they were suddenly paying way, way more for their most basic raw materials. And here's the tough part, the trade-off. Sure, American steel and aluminum producers got a boost, but other American industries, they paid a huge price. The U.S. International Trade Commission actually did the math, and they found that all those other industries that use steel and aluminum lost, on average, $3.4 billion every single year just because of those higher costs. And we're not talking about some small, fringe businesses. We are talking about the absolute backbone of American manufacturing. Things like industrial machinery, car parts, hand tools, even the equipment that helps grow our food. All of these huge sectors saw their production fall. Why? Simple. Their raw materials just got too expensive.
Okay, so we've followed the money from the shipping docks to the factory floor. Now let's take that last step and bring it right into your home, into your own budget.
So what's the bottom line for your wallet? Well, a bunch of economists ran the numbers, and they're pretty eye-opening. The Tax Foundation estimates it's an extra hit of about $1,600 a year for the average household. Another study from Pan Wharton puts it around $500 for a typical family. Look, whichever number you go with, it's a real, direct hit to the family budget.
And you don't need a PhD in economics to see this. You can see it right in your shopping cart. Think about stuff we buy that's almost all imported. Your morning coffee, that new sofa, your clothes. Prices for all of them started creeping up. And because of the metal tariffs, same thing for canned goods, for appliances, it got so crazy at one point that the price of sneakers was expected to almost double.
You know, it's easy to get lost in all these big numbers, but there's a real human side to this. Take Michelle Florio, a paraprofessional from New Jersey. She told NPR that because of rising costs, she had to cut back on giving baked goods as gifts, a tradition she's had for 53 years. It's just a powerful reminder that these big, abstract policies, they have very real, very personal effects on people's lives.
And if you thought those earlier numbers were something, well, some studies paint an even tougher picture. One from Yale projected that, in the long run, these tariffs could force the average household to spend an extra, get this, $2,400 a year. So, let's pull it all together. We've followed the money all the way from the port, through the factory, and right to our front door. So what's the big takeaway here?
When you ask that first question, who really pays for tariffs? All the evidence points in one pretty clear direction. Now, the politics around it can get messy and complicated, for sure, but the economics of it, it's actually pretty straightforward. Yes, the U.S. importer writes that initial check, but it's the American consumer who ends up paying for most of it in the end.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. See, this isn't about saying tariffs are good or bad. It's about understanding what they actually cost. So, if the price of protecting some American industries is paid by higher costs for American families and other American businesses, what then is the true price of protection?